All right, hi. Today we're going to give a presentation on educational records with a focus on special education records. So often we find that parents are given copies of documents and they maybe were never really explained what the document is meant to do and what they need to then do with that document. So this is going to be, what is it, what do I do with it, and what does it mean? Broken down by special education attorneys. I'm Jackie Lembeck. I'm one of the partners here at McAndrews, Mehalick, Connolly, Hulse and Ryan, and I'm here with Rachel Rosenberg. Rachel, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm an attorney here in the special education department as well.
So we're going to go through some of the most common special education records and what you as a parent would need to do with them. The first one that we're going to talk about is the permission to evaluate. This is what starts the special education process for any student. The permission to evaluate is the very first document that would start the identification of a child as a student who may need special education services. So if we look here on the slide, there is a copy of the annotated permission to evaluate that is available in Pennsylvania. So there's some comments and whatnot that you can ignore here, but this is what the document itself looks like when it is blank. Up at the top, you'll see that it has permission to evaluate, or PTE, on there, and a consent form. What this document does is it tells a parent that the school district or charter school wants to conduct an initial evaluation. So the child has not been found eligible for services yet, and we want to evaluate to determine if they need special education. If you receive this document, it would be probably for one of two reasons. Either one, you've requested an evaluation and the district or charter school agrees with you that your child needs to be evaluated and they've given you this consent form. Or two, the school district has some concerns about how your child is progressing and thinks that it's possible that your child may have a disability. Note that I say possible. It doesn't mean that the child definitely has a disability. And it has to be conducted, this evaluation, just if we suspect they could. Some children will be evaluated and found, no, we don't feel it's a disability. Others will be evaluated and found, yes, we do feel it's a disability. And we'll go over what happens at that point. So if we continue on, you'll see that on the next page here, there's a part where it says the evaluation will consist of the following tests or assessments. This piece is so important for a parent to review when they get this evaluation form, because it's going to tell you what areas are going to be assessed. So every place is a little bit different in how they describe what types of tests and assessments are going to be, but basically you want to look to understand, like, for example, is there going to be assessment of the student's cognitive ability, of their academic achievement? Are there some needs maybe in behavior? Then it might need to say that there will be either measures of social, emotional, behavioral functioning. It might say that there needs to be a functional behavior assessment. If speech or language is a potential concern, it might say speech or language evaluation. It might say occupational therapy evaluation if things like fine motor or sensory sensitivities are a concern. Basically, this is like if you got a slip for blood work for a lab. This is telling you what tests we're looking for. So if you have concerns and you don't see a test that's going to address that concern, that would be something to follow up with the school district or the charter school on, to say, well, you know, I'm really concerned about speech and language. I didn't see that on here. Can we add that to here? What you want at the end of the day is for the evaluation that is conducted to give you a comprehensive look at how your child is functioning, particularly in every area where you have some suspicion that there could be a disability. The last piece here is this part for parent consent, and this is really important, especially for an initial evaluation. School districts and charter schools cannot evaluate a child for the first time without parent consent. So you would need to check that you give consent, and you would have to give that consent form back to have that initial evaluation started. Because the initial evaluation is the first step in the process of getting a child special education, if that consent form does not go back to the school, then there will be no special education services that could be put into place. So it's really important that if you think your child may qualify for special education and you get this form, that you fill it out and you give it back. There is a related form that students who are already identified receive, and that is a permission to reevaluate, or sometimes we call it a PTRE instead of the PTE. That is a little bit different. That's a student who's already identified and they're being reevaluated. In Pennsylvania, students need to be evaluated at least every 3 years. Students with intellectual disability need to be evaluated every 2 years. But reevaluations can occur more frequently than that, particularly if there's a change in the student's circumstances or if there are new concerns that come up over time. So you do not need to wait a full 3 years if there is a reason to evaluate earlier. If you receive that PTRE, it will have the same sort of information about what kinds of assessments are going to be done, and it will also ask you whether you're going to give consent to that evaluation. Once a school district receives the consent form back, that is what starts the timeline for the evaluation. So many parents are aware that there is a 60 calendar day timeline for a school district or charter school to complete an evaluation. That does not include the summer. It's only from the start of the school year through the end of the school year, and it's 60 calendar days. So if right now we were looking at an evaluation being started, we would look at 60 calendar days from when that permission form is returned to the school district or the charter school. Really important that it's not just when you sign it, it's when you give it back. So I always recommend to families that they have really good records of when they signed things and when they gave them back. Email is an excellent way to do that because it is time stamped and it is something that can be recovered to show exactly when a document went from one party to another. It's a little trickier if you're handing something back in. So I don't recommend things like signing a form and putting it in your child's backpack or folder to go back to school, because sometimes if there's a question later about when exactly it got to the school, it could be very difficult to prove that.
So after providing consent to evaluate, as Jackie just explained, the school district has 60 calendar days to get that evaluation done. So the next document that will be given to you if you do consent to an evaluation would be the evaluation report, or the ER. This document is the report that the district puts together after evaluating a student to determine whether or not the student is eligible to receive special education services. And this should be a comprehensive report that does a full assessment of the student. It should involve a variety of things, including background information about the student, any parent input that you provide, records or prior assessments that have been done or considered, and then it should include the actual testing that is done, the evaluations, the results, what that means, and then conclusions, whether a student is eligible or is not eligible for an IEP. This is the first page of what the evaluation report looks like. And we're not going to go through every page because it is a really big document. But the first page of the document should include that background information that's listed here, the name, the date of the report, the school district, etc. And then it will also include a list of the sections that are included in the report, some of which I just listed. So it should include the reason for referral, and then the sources of evaluation data. So these are just some of those first four of evaluation data that's included on the first page. So that's evaluations and information provided by the parent of the student, observations, including teacher observations and observations by the related services providers. So That should include observations by the teachers of your student, and also if the student receives speech and language or occupational therapy, their observations would be included there as well. This would include recommendations by teachers. It would also include the student's physical condition, including their health, vision, and hearing, social or cultural background, and adaptive behavior relevant to the student's suspected disability and potential need for special education. So this is page 4 of the evaluation report, and the reason why we wanted to show this page 2 in particular is because it provides, it's really important for how you respond to it. So this page lists all of the team participants in the evaluation. So this includes everybody who gives input into the evaluation. That includes the parents, it includes the evaluator. So this depends on what assessment's taking place, which is included on that permission to evaluate that Jackie discussed, but it could include a school psychologist, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist. It would include special education teachers, regular education teachers. It also typically includes a representative from the district. And as you'll see, you only need to note your agreement or disagreement with the conclusions if the conclusion finds that a student is eligible for a specific learning disability. Eligibility for special education could fall under a variety of categories. Specific learning disability is just one of those categories. There could be a variety of other reasons that a student is eligible for special education services. That could include a speech and language impairment. It could include OHI, which is other health impairment, which could be something like ADHD. It could include autism. It could include a variety of different things. And those different findings don't necessarily require a parent or other members of the team to note whether they agree or disagree. It's only required to note for the finding of a specific learning disability.
All right, moving into the IEP. If the evaluation report does conclude that the child needs special education and related services, then they're going to be found eligible for an IEP. That IEP is going to be basically the blueprint of all of the services that the child is going to get. And it is supposed to be individualized because that's why a child needs an IEP. They need specially designed instruction that is going to be individualized to them. So this is like the main building block document of what is going to happen. It may get revised over time, but everything that the child is going to receive for their special education should be memorialized in this IEP. There are many different sections within the IEP. We're going to take you through a few of them that are really important to understand. So first, let's start with what does an IEP look like? This is the general form that is used in Pennsylvania. It can look a little bit different in other places, but usually there is a first page that's going to identify this information. You'll see the IEP's term in this first document where you're going to have a meeting date and then the implementation date. An IEP needs to be revised at least once a year, so there should be an annual meeting. So if the IEP meeting date was 1 year ago last year, you should have a new one by now to have a new annual IEP for the upcoming year. Doesn't mean that that's the only time that you could meet. You could meet much more frequently than just once a year, particularly if there are reasons that the team needs to have some further discussions. Also on that first page or two, once the information's filled in, these pages get longer, you will see the dates of revision. So if an IEP meeting is held in the middle of its year, there may be a revision. You should have a date noted there, and you should note who was at the IEP and what was revised at that point. So all of that should be tracked in the IEP document. Toward the beginning, there's this list of special considerations. And this one I do think is important to review, because sometimes at IEP meetings, it's really natural for teams to kind of blow by this pretty quickly without really discussing each of the special considerations. Particularly, I find that there should be discussion of whether the student has communication needs. That would be definitely something that needs to be discussed if you have any concern about your child's speech or language abilities. Whether the child needs assistive technology, that would definitely be something that you want to discuss if you think that assistive technology may be something that would help aid your child. Sometimes an assessment called a SET is done at that point to have a student trial different forms of assistive technology to see what may help. And if we go to the next page, there's a spot about behavior. If behavior is impeding your child's learning or the learning of others, then that should indicate yes. And another document needs to be created at that point called a positive behavior support plan. And I think it's really important to note that behavior doesn't always look like, like a big aggression or outburst behavior. Behavior can also be withdrawing from instruction. Behavior can be avoiding work. It could be things that are a little bit more passive, but are still a behavior that is impeding the child from getting the instruction that they need. The next part starts the present levels of achievement. This is where we are right now. The IEP is going to take us to where we want to be a year from now, but the first step is knowing where are we right now. This should be a full review of the child's current status, which can include their report card and their grades. It can include benchmarking assessments to see whether they are at or below benchmark for reading or for math. It can also include information from other evaluations that were conducted, and it can include information from teachers and from parents. Parent input is included in this. You'll see that there is a whole section for parent concerns for enhancing the education of the student. This is your section of the IEP, and your unedited feedback should be allowed to be in this section of the IEP. Finally, there's a part that says academic, developmental, and functional needs related to the child's disability. And often that will look like a bullet point list of the needs that are going to be addressed. This is one of those key areas to review and make sure you ask yourself the question, does this sound like my child? If you're reviewing and your number one concern for your child is their inability to organize their materials, and you're reviewing the needs and organization is not on there, that might be a clue that you and the school team are not quite on the same page about what the needs are. And if you're not on the same page about what the needs are, it will be unlikely that you'll be on the same page about how to address those needs. So really important to take a look at those needs and make sure you feel that your child is reflected in that list and that everything that they need to work on is going to be listed there. The next section that we're going to focus on, there are other sections that we've skipped just because we are looking at kind of the most typically applicable sections, are the goals and objectives. So every student with an IEP is going to have measurable annual goals, and those will be recorded within the IEP. This is a goal that's going to take your child from the creation of the IEP through 1 year later, and it's going to tell you where the student starts with the baseline and where we want the student to end up. What's really important about reviewing goals is, 1, do you have a goal in each area of need? 2, can you measure the goal? Do you understand how the team is going to measure the goal? And 3, is it an appropriately ambitious goal for your child? So understanding where that baseline is and where you want the child to end up is so critical. Things that we see all the time are goals without baselines. That's incredibly hard for a parent to then track the progress if you don't know where the child is starting. And we also see goals that are vague as to how they are going to be measured. And that can be difficult too, because one person may have a different interpretation of what they're looking at than another. And we want to be really concrete so that we're getting data that can be compared apples to apples. Toward the end of the IEP, there's a section for the SDI, the specially designed instruction, as well as the related services and support for school personnel. Now, for most students, these are going to take a couple of pages because those sections are going to be filled in. And this is what is actually going to be provided to the child to make them be able to have that progress that we want to see in the goals. So the SDI should tell you what sorts of modifications and specially designed instruction the child is going to get. This could be everything from accommodations like preferential seating to actual instruction like direct instruction in reading or in math. And it should tell you in the location where this is occurring. Are these things that are occurring in the general education classroom, special education classroom, or some combination of both? And the frequency. If your child is receiving direct instruction in something, I really like to see a definitive frequency, something like, 1 hour per day or 90 minutes per cycle, or something that you know how often something is occurring. And then you should see the projected beginning date and anticipated duration. If you have revisions and you're adding new things over time, they may have different beginning dates and durations based on that. For the related services, these are additional services that children can receive as part of their IEP. Things like speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, transportation can be a related service, and counseling, others. There are many that can be included. Same thing with the specially designed instruction. Ideally, you want to be able to read that and know what the service is. You want to know whether it's in a group or an individual setting. You want to know where it's occurring. The services can be pushed in to the general education classroom for the therapist to come work on the skills with the student in that general education setting. They could be pulled out where the child is leaving and going to a different setting, like a speech room, for example, to receive the services. The frequency, again, should be clear to you. You should know, for example, if it's however many minutes per week, minutes per month, something along those lines. And again, same thing with the projected beginning date and duration. If you're making revisions in the middle of the year, you may see changes to that as you go through. And the last part that we want to focus on here is the support for school personnel. This is a commonly overlooked section. I think it's really powerful and can be really important. This is how your school team is going to communicate and support one another. And sometimes we want to delineate very specific supports. Like, for example, if a child has occupational therapy needs, there might be a need for that occupational therapist to provide consult time to the general or special education teachers so that they can then generalize the skills that the student is working on in their OT sessions to the rest of the day. So ideally, you want to see that there is collaboration from a number of different providers. Also, if there's a behavior plan, I really like to look and make sure that there's support for school personnel, that whoever is creating the behavior plan, if it's a board certified behavior analyst, for example, that they are giving the support to the people who will then be implementing that behavior plan. So everybody is on the same page about how to implement the positive behavior support plan.
The next document we want to talk about is the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, also known as a NREP. And in other states can be referred to as other things. It's often called a prior written notice, or a PWN. This is the document that the school district needs to issue every time it's updating the educational placement or services for your student, or making changes to an IEP. So after an IEP is issued, like the one that Jackie just went through, the school district needs to issue a NREP making its proposal to put that IEP into action. And you are given the opportunity to sign that NORAP, whether you agree or disagree. So unlike the petition to evaluate that Jackie went through earlier, with the petition to evaluate, you need to provide your consent in order for that evaluation to then take place. With a NORAP, you are given 10 days to sign the NORAP with your approval or disapproval. If you do not make a signature within those 10 days, then the IEP automatically goes into effect. And those timelines can vary by state as well. In Pennsylvania, you have 10 calendar days to respond, whereas in Delaware, you have 10 school days to respond. So we'll go through what this document looks like, and we'll go through that signature page as well, so you know where exactly that all needs to take place. And I'll go into more detail when we get there.
Yeah, so important to have that timeline in mind. The only time that it does not apply is the initial provision of services. So the very first IEP will not go into effect without consent. But after that, any NORAP that you get, if it is not responded to, after that period of time, the IEP changes would go into effect.
Thanks, Jackie. So this is the first page of the NORAP. The really important thing to look at here, well, the entire document is important, but it's important to pay attention to the type of action that's being taken with the NORAP. So it'll provide, as you can see, it lists a lot of different actions that this could be related to. It could be a proposal of initial provision, that first IEP, like Jackie just explained. It could be a refusal to initiate an evaluation. It could be a proposal to change the identification for a student of why they're receiving an IEP. It could be a change of placement for disciplinary reasons or for other reasons. It could be about a due process hearing moving forward. Basically, any action that the district is taking to change your students' programming, there needs to be a NORAP in order for that change to take place. So here's either one or multiple boxes will be checked, and that will tell you what the purpose is of this NORAP in particular. The next page of the NORAP provides a description of what action is being taken place or not being taken place. So you see here under number 2, it says a description of the action proposed or refused by the school district. And then in that box, it'll include a description of what's taking place. It could say something like the IEP with this date is going to be implemented, or it could say the school district is rejecting the request by the parent for this revision to be made, or the school district is changing the placement of a student from the general education classroom to certain amount of time in a special education classroom or to a different school altogether. So whatever is the action taking place based on this NORAP is what should be included in this box. And then box 3 is an explanation of why the school or district proposed or refused to take an action. So if you, as a parent, requested a revision to the IEP and the school district said no, their reason for saying no should be included in this box. And additionally, their reason for proposing a certain action should also be included in this box. And it's really important that you take a look at that and really understand why the district is doing or not doing whatever they're doing with this NORAP. So this page goes through the signatures that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So again, like I said, you have 10 days, 10 calendar days in Pennsylvania to respond with your approval or disapproval. So as you can see, you can note that you either request a meeting to discuss the recommendation, or that you approve the action or recommendation, or that you don't approve. And then if you don't approve, you have the ability to add in your reasoning for why you don't approve of it. But then if you don't approve with the NORAP, in order for whatever the district is recommending, in order for that not to go into place, you need to note that you're either requesting mediation or due process. If you say that you don't approve, but then don't check off mediation or due process, then the proposed, then whatever the district is proposing is still going to go into place or go into effect.
And even on top of just checking mediation or due process within those 10 days, I would recommend that it be filed for, that either mediation or due process be filed for in that time. If you want to ensure that your child gets put into stay put or pendency, which means that they get to remain in their last agreed upon placement and that the new changes will not be put into effect. And all of that can be accomplished right on the Office for, in Pennsylvania, the Office for Dispute Resolutions website. It's ODR pa.org. And they have a lot of really very accessible information about how to file for mediation or due process for families. And they have just an online submission form that can be used particularly for mediation. It's a very parent-friendly process.
One other thing I'll note is that sometimes these NREPs are provided to parents via like a DocuSign or electronic signing platform. And sometimes I know parents have trouble if they want to put a reason for disapproval with adding that in. Sometimes there's not like a text box readily available. So you can either, add a text box if you know how to do that on the computer, or if you're not figuring out, if you're having trouble figuring out how to add that in, you can always print it out and write your reasoning by hand. And then you could either scan that back in and submit it by email. You could give it in person. But either way, you should always have the ability to add in that reasoning if you want to. So don't let a DocuSign confusion be the reason why you don't add that in.
That's a great point. Okay, on to progress monitoring. So if your child has been evaluated, found eligible for an IEP, you've received the IEP, you've approved the NREP and it's gone into place, now you should be receiving progress monitoring. This is going to look at your child's goals and how they are making progress over time. The form can look very different in different places. Some places it's going to be kind of put like right into the IEP underneath the goal section. Others you're going to get a standalone progress report that might look like this. But one way or another, you should be receiving it, and you should be receiving it at least with every report card, like every report card timing. So whether that's on like trimester or some other quarters, at minimum, you should get it that often. And some students really are going to need to get progress monitoring sent home much more frequently. So some things are more appropriate to monitor on a trimester or quarterly basis. Other things would not be and really would need to be monitored much more frequently. Something like if there are significant ongoing behaviors, you might need to see weekly or even daily progress reports on how your child is doing. When you're receiving and reviewing a progress report, there are a couple things that are really important. First, you want to be able to look at how your student is progressing over time. That sounds very obvious, right? But it really depends on what kind of data is included in the progress report. So two things. One, there needs to be a data match. What the goal says is going to be monitored and what you actually get for the monitoring have to match each other. So if you have a oral reading fluency goal that is going to be measured in words correct per minute, but you're getting progress monitoring that gives you more of a subjective, student is reading more fluently and with greater accuracy, but it doesn't give you words correct per minute, you're not going to be able to really understand whether progress is being made or not. Same thing with whether all pieces of the goal are monitored. So again, going back to that reading goal example, if the goal is to read however many words correct per minute and at a certain accuracy level, you need to see both pieces of data to understand if the student is in fact reading more words correct per minute and at the level of accuracy that you want to see. If there is a goal that has a rubric that goes with it, which is very common for goals for things like behavior, executive functioning, and social skills, then you want to make sure that you have a copy of that rubric too, so that you can see whether the student really is making progress on all of the different areas. And you want to make sure that it's broken down into each area. So if a goal gives you an overall score, for example, if there's a writing rubric and it gives you an overall score, it's really helpful if you could see how that was broken down. Is one area consistently lower than the others? Sometimes you can't tell. The overall score might look okay, but there might be one area that's consistently lower. So really identifying whether you have the information that you need to know whether you feel that your child is making progress is so important. And then making sure that you get this progress report. And if you have any concerns with it, feel free. You should be requesting an IEP meeting at that point to discuss those. You do not need to wait a full year to discuss concerns that your child is not making appropriate progress. So we have some examples here of IEP goals. I gave a couple, but just to be able to look at them, they could be things like a student writing a 3-paragraph essay. And, this goal is very specific. It's including at least 5 sentences in each paragraph, an introduction, 2 to 3 facts, and a conclusion, receiving a 4 on a rubric scale. So when you get the progress monitoring, I would personally want to see not just whether the student has earned a 3 or a 4, but I'd want to know how did they earn that 3 or 4 based on that rubric. For the next goal example that we have here, a student will improve emotional regulation by identifying feelings of frustration and using appropriate coping strategies. This one, again, is something that you'd want to make sure that you and the team are really understanding how that is being monitored and where it is being monitored. Is it throughout the full day that the school team is taking this data? And then the next one, when given short independent work tasks during a class period, the student will demonstrate improved task initiation and follow through by beginning the task within 2 minutes and completing it within the allotted time. Really nice specifics that we know how much time they need to complete it in. And we also are looking at whether they are completing it in the allotted time. Again, ideally, when you get that progress monitoring, you're going to be able to see both pieces of it. Are they starting it in enough time, and are they completing it within the allotted time?
The last document that we're going to go through is a Section 504 plan. When a district evaluates a student, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, sometimes it might find based on that evaluation that a student is not eligible for an IEP, but is instead eligible for a 504 plan. So a district might find that a student is eligible for a Section 504 plan if the student has a disability that requires accommodations, but not specially designed instruction, meaning that the student will have accommodations in place and modifications that might help them in their school day, but there won't be those measurable goals that Jackie just went through to measure how their instruction, what kind of progress are taking place, and they won't be given that individualized, specialized instruction. So this is the first page of a 504 plan, kind of similar to some of the other documents we've gone over where that background information about the student is provided. Similar to the IEP, this will also have the Section 504 meeting date and the effective date saying when the 504 plan goes into place and when and how long it's effective, and that should be updated on a yearly basis as well. And then the different participants in that meeting will be listed as well. So this is the next page of the 504 plan. So this identifies the student's needs, just like on that IEP, it might be a bulleted list of what needs the student has that we need accommodations and modifications for. And then listed here will be all of the different accommodations and services in place. And again, if this is filled in, it might be multiple pages. And it notes not only the services that should be in place, but also the position responsible. So if those are accommodations that take place in the classroom, and we'll go through some examples next, but that, for instance, if the accommodation is preferential seating, then the position responsible for that, for making sure that's in place, would be the general education teacher, the teacher in that classroom. The 504 plan should also note when and how progress will be reviewed and assembled, and it should note an annual review. So some examples of accommodations that could be provided to a student who needs a 504 plan, but not an IEP. And of course, these accommodations may also be for students with IEPs. But some examples of those types of accommodations include providing breaks for a student in the classroom when needed, providing frequent redirection and prompting to assist the student in staying on task. It could include small group testing. There are a variety of testing accommodations that might be in place for a student who has a 504 plan, but not an IEP, such as extra time to complete assignments and tests. There could be an accommodation for using a school nurse's restroom if needed, rather than the general bathroom. There could be allowing access to school counselor if needed. Preferential seating, like I discussed earlier, such as seating close to the teacher in the classroom. Another accommodation could be allowing a student to use fidget tools during instruction. So those were just some of the different forms that are really common for parents with students with disabilities. I know that they can be overwhelming, but hopefully this presentation helped break them down a bit. But if you have any questions about the presentation today, the forms, any variety of forms you received, or anything else related to your students' special education needs, you can always feel free to reach out. Jackie and my email addresses are listed here. And then you could reach out to our firm generally if you have any concerns and want a meeting with attorneys from our office.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We do free initial consultations, which includes a review of these special education records and a meeting with an attorney to get an opinion as to whether your child is receiving a free appropriate public education. So if you have any concerns, don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.